Good evening. You're watching a special edition of Left, Right and Centre on a day when Prime Minister Narendra Modi has landed in Australia, the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Australia in 28 years. The question is, why has it taken this long for an Indian PM to visit Australia, and what is it in the relationship that has dramatically changed over the last few years? Over the next 30 minutes, we explore the potential of the India-Australia relationship, the possible hurdles that could still remain, and how Mr. Modi is perceived in Australia. It's a visit that's generating a lot of buzz, particularly after his visit to the United States and his engagement with the Indian diaspora there. It is expected that he will have an equally amazing reception from the Indian community in Australia once he does get down to business there as well. Well, we have a very interesting and terrific panel with us this evening. People from diverse backgrounds, from corporate backgrounds to those involved in social work. We have 3 Australians who've been living in India for some time who will give us their perspective on the India-Australia relationship, and 3 Indians who have some connection to Australia either by having studied there or who keep traveling there frequently for work. And I'm going to throw open this round table to our panelists tonight straight away. And first to Sean Starr. He's the chair of the India-Australia Youth Dialogue, which has done a lot of great work, Sean, in terms of bringing people-to-people contact and bringing young people together and having this kind of a dialogue between the 2 countries. And I believe you were doing that even when things weren't so rosy, even when you, for instance, had race attacks making headlines instead of the good stuff.
That's right, Nidhi. The Australia-India Youth Dialogue is about to have its 4th annual conference, which is due to happen in Australia in January, this coming January. And the last 4 have been taking place in Australia and India in alternate years, with 15 young and quite inspiring leaders from Australia and India, some of whom are here with us in this roundtable today. And the matters and issues and challenges and opportunities which we discussed during these conferences are really quite vibrant and dynamic discussions.
So what have you seen change in those dialogues over the last 4 years?
Look, I think the dialogue has changed from what challenges exist in the Australia-India relationship and what would now, for the most part, appear to be water under the bridge, if I can use that colloquial term, to the opportunities and possible collaborations between young people, young entrepreneurs, young social workers, young business people in the space. So a lot of young people in the Australia-India relationship are exploring ideas of how they can work together, and through our alumni grant scheme and other alumni arrangements, we've seen some fantastic... So
in a sense, the tone has changed from maybe a little negative to more hopeful, positive, looking at collaboration and so on.
I think it might be a characteristic of youth. That we always look for the positive in everything, and the Australia-India relationship has a lot of positives in it. And as young people in this space, we see a lot of fantastic opportunities for youth involvement, for government-to-government involvement, and most importantly for people-to-people links, and that's something that has been a consistent discussion for the past 4 years.
Manu Sundaram, you lived and worked in Australia for 8 years. Why do you think it's taken so long for the relationship to realize its potential? I mean, you have a prime ministerial visit now happening after almost 30 years. That's a pretty long gap.
That's very true. You know, it's taken a long time and it's been long overdue. But I think it's both parties here are equally responsible. I think India too had never to sort of go back. We've both shared one thing in common, right? Colonialization, and from colonialization we've got cricket and English. So other than these 2 links, we've not made any strategic links over the last 40-50 years since our independence. The last Indian Prime Minister visit, like you said, was in 1986. And since then, Australia has, in recent past, shown a fair bit of interest towards India. 2 of the more recent Prime Ministers, Julia Gillard and Mr. Tony Abbott, have both made visits to the Indian state. And this is the first Indian leader's visit to Australia. I think the problem has been perhaps at a bureaucratic level, and like my co-panelist has already said, the people-to-people relationship has grown from strength to strength. Almost 10-15 years ago nearly, when I went there as a student, there were not very many Indian students, but today Indians form the 4th or the 5th largest ethnic minority group in Australia. And
I believe today there are more Indian students going to Australia than even to the UK.
That's right. Apart from the United States, Australia and UK are the biggest recipients of Indian student immigration, and Australia has pipped the UK to that post in the recent past. And that's mostly because students and people of India still believe of Australia as a land of opportunity, as a land where which offers good education and then living opportunities and an extremely good quality of life. So
when all that news came in about the race attacks, for instance, how did you react to that? Were you taken aback by that? Because you've spent so much time there as a student also. And there was quite a lot of media hype about it here as well. In fact, the sense I got from Australian diplomats here was that maybe it was a little overblown, but Indians were angry, and there were a series of attacks that took place. Did that surprise you?
Yep, it came as a huge surprise to me. I'd spent nearly 8 years in Australia, and by and large my experience was fairly good. I mean, I won't like to sugarcoat it, but then every sort of experience living away from home comes with its own set of problems. But Australia is no different from any other country. I mean, in any country in the world today, you can go and face an unsavory situation. But Australia specifically, I think, got perhaps the short end of the stick. In my time there, I've met some fantastic people, and I don't see none of these sort of media reports took anything away. I think we perhaps even maybe overreacted a bit too much. Perhaps that was a moment of media
madness.
Madness, perhaps, yeah.
I'll say that word that you didn't want to. But Katie Rose is with us. She's the co-founder of the Fabric Social, which works with conflict-affected women here in India. And I believe that you're working, for instance, with women in Assam, which is a terrific initiative. Let me just ask you, here a lot of people feel, as far as the India-Australia relationship is concerned, is that Australia wasn't really interested. I mean, we've seen Australia, for instance, for a long time oppose India on its nuclear program. When India went to the nuclear suppliers group seeking a historic waiver, and I covered that story. I remember Australia was one of the countries that strongly opposed giving that waiver to India. And now that's all changed. We've got a nuclear deal in place, and it's quite landmark. It's quite a U-turn. Would you concede that Australia just didn't give India that prominence that it deserved in a sense until now? You think that's why maybe things have been so uneven?
In my perspective, many of the Australians that I've met who have come to India have been part of the NGO scene, so have come here for gender rights or environmental rights. So I guess the side that I come from is quite left. I've always thought Australia has had a great attitude towards halting any nuclear power, but at the moment we have a very conservative government comparative to other years, and perhaps this is where this kind of change from a more left to a right approach has come.
Which means you don't necessarily agree with them, which is okay. I mean,
yeah, well, of course, I think that maybe perhaps India and Australia are coming at the same point in time with similar linear policies, and this is what struck the difference. We've both had a change in governments, and they've both been perhaps more right of centre than before, and maybe this is the similarity that lies.
Jennifer, your perspective, what do you think was missing? Was it missing from both sides, or one more than the other?
I can only speak from an education perspective, having worked in primary and secondary education, so at that low level of education. And I found that in Australia there was a change in around 2010 when the Gillard government put out the white paper on Australia in the Asian century. So it actually mapped where we were going. And in that paper, India finally came to prominence. And that's when the conversation about we need to start learning Hindi in our schools in Australia. We need to start engaging and learning more about this country. So I think that for Australia was a big turning point. I'm not sure about from the Indian side of things.
But Katie, just tell us about perceptions. You've lived and worked here now for what, more than a year?
Almost a year.
So did you come with certain perceptions about India? I'm sure we all do. I mean, before we go anywhere, that a particular country would be like this. This is what its people would be like. So yeah. What's different from what you thought it would be?
The first time I came to India, I was a tourist. So I came with a tourist group, and I did all of the very Indian things that a foreigner tourist does in India. The second time I came was an opportunity to work for a legal NGO for women's rights. And what really surprised me was the strength of the feminist movement here since 2012, and the presence of a very young, angry feminist voice rising up from India, which shocked me, but also inspired me to stay. And the work
that would be after the gang rape had happened in Delhi.
Yeah, that's true.
And that made big headlines, didn't it, in Australia?
It made massive headlines, and the collective voice in India was something that I think feminists everywhere should be very proud of. The way that it knew no religious sect or any class. Everybody was equally as angry, and women for the first time had a collective voice. And that was really inspiring for me to see as a foreigner coming here.
Let me also ask the others. Dr. Amit Ranjan is here with us. He's the Australia Awards Ambassador promoting Australian fellowships here in India. Dr. Ranjan, let's talk about Mr. Modi then. What do you think will change with his visit? I mean, he's certainly a very charismatic Prime Minister, and he's now engaging not just with Australia but with other countries which we seem to have sort of fallen off the map for India, you know, all these years. And, you know, that's a good thing.
It is indeed. Australia has not been branded in a way in India the way UK and US are as educational hubs. So people who study in Australia come back to India do not get as much value here in the society as if you came back from the US or UK. So the Prime Minister's visit and so much thrust upon education as well. I'm sure this is bound to change, that Australian education and in general other businesses etc. will get more visibility. Australia needs more branding in India, and I'm sure Modi's visit will
change that. Mr. Modi is, of course, you know, tends to generate a lot of media interest. Mudit Parashar is with us, and he's a Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at JVK. Mudit Parashar, you spent like, what, I think 15-20 days a month traveling back and forth. What is exciting the Indian community there about Mr. Modi's visit? I'm sure you've had a chance to ask people there. What are they looking forward to?
Well, I think one of the key elements obviously is that it's a moment of pride for everybody. I think everyone associates with, suddenly over the last 4 to 5 months the visibility in the global arena has just kind of shot through the roof, and everyone associates with that. So the local community is definitely wants to kind of bask in that glory as well. And other than that, I think it is kind of symbolic of the opportunities that lie ahead. I mean, in one way, a lot has been ignored in terms of what could have been done, from a business, economic growth, trade point of view between India and Australia, which partly I think has bearings on the earlier question in terms of why there wasn't such closeness. I think, for example, if you examine the relations with Japan or with China or with Korea, for a lot of these countries, Australia was always a resource base. And they invested hard capital to make sure that resources were owned and developed, and that kind of led to a lot of interaction between those countries. I think that stage is now possibly being set between India and Australia as well.
For that to change.
For that to change. And I don't think it's just about. I think the resource kind of supply, whether it's coking coal or whether it's gas or anything else, is the obvious one. Or thermal coal as well, for that matter, is the obvious one. But I think more than that, there is a lot of potential in terms of just cooperating from a skill development point of view. I think in so many areas, just whether it's the mining industry, whether it's health, I think the focus that Australia as a country has on skills, I think if India can imbibe some of that, it's definitely going to benefit.
But Sean, I'll take this back to you, because one important thing that Katie mentioned there earlier was the sort of the similarity in the ideological leanings of the two governments today. And in that sense, do you think that this then gives us a chance to have a strategic partnership that takes things to the next level? Because it's just been absent, and now you have Mr. Modi, who's focusing on a Look East policy, is trying to strengthen ties with Japan, now with Australia. Do you see a fundamental shift? Do Australians see a fundamental shift?
Look, I think short answer is absolutely yes. I think there's much scope for our strategic partnership to move from strength to strength. The very fact that Prime Minister Modi is going to Australia, and no Indian Prime Minister has on a national state visit for 28 years, is symbolic of that. To put that in perspective, I think the statistics show that more than 50% of India's population is under the age of 25. This essentially means that during their lifetime, no Indian Prime Minister has visited Australia. So the point is that this in and of itself is symbolic of the strength and growing strength of the Australia-India relationship. And I think certainly, yes, there's scope for that to move to the next level.